Welcome everyone to the session here in terms of STEM. We're going to be doing a STEM talk. This is session 19. I wanted to introduce myself. This is the 7th Symposium of Rising Scholars, and I'm Anthony Vaverka, the head of mentor recruitment, and I'll be moderating this session today. The goal of the symposium is to celebrate and showcase the hard work of Polygen scholars, all of whom have tirelessly worked on their projects over the past couple of months. We have 4 students presenting on a variety of topics today. A fellow member of our Polygen's team will be scoring every student's presentation, which will help us determine prize winners after the event. Please type your questions in the Q&A if you have any questions for each speaker. We'll have time at the end of each presentation for the speakers to answer your question. I wanted to give you a background on who will be presenting today. We have Nikhil, we have Khyathi, and we have Abigail. We're going to start with Nikhil and then move on to Abigail and finally round out with Khyathi. We'll turn it over to you, Nikhil, and let me know if you need any assistance on the tech side.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Should I start to share my screen?
Yep, and then Abigail and Khyathi, you can turn off the cameras and I'll spotlight. Perfect. And you can share your screen at your earliest convenience. I can see it, so we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Nikhil Vallikat, and I will be presenting on the preventative measures for mitigating CTE. First, some background on CTE, or also known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE is a chronic neurodegenerative disease caused by repeated traumatic brain injuries. It's not exactly known like how many traumatic brain injuries causes CTE, but its effects are known. The concussions are a type of mild traumatic brain injury, which especially affects football players. The effects of CTE range from memory loss, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, suicidality, Parkinson's syndrome, and progressive dementia. These symptoms vary as CTE progresses through its 4 stages, which usually takes about 10 to 12 years after incidence. A problematic aspect of CTE is that it can only be definitively diagnosed posthumously through examination of abnormal tau proteins in the brain. This makes it harder for overall prevalence to be known. CTE has been found in a wide range of people, from professional athletes to ex-military personnel. Signs of CTE can be monitored using MRI, however. As of now, there is no cure for CTE. Because of this, aiming to develop preventative measures is paramount in reducing the incidence and severity of CTE in football players. CTE has become a significant health risk for football players, and not just in former professional athletes, but also collegiate and high school athletes. There have already been over 1 million cases of CTE observed in former high school football athletes in the study. Another study has found that CTE in 3 out of 14 high school players and 48 out of 53 college football players. Extreme cases of CTE include the tragic suicide of Junior Seau, professional football Hall of Famer. Before discussing preventative measures, we must first understand the forces behind concussions, as they serve as the most common traumatic brain injuries among football players, which is also linked to CTE. During a concussion, the brain is jolted around, stretching and damaging brain cells. Specifically, the protective tissue around the brain is damaged. The main forces involved in a concussion are linear and rotational acceleration. Linear acceleration includes head-on impact and injuries, including intracranial hemorrhaging and skull fractures. An example of this is when a car brakes too hard and the passenger's head jolts forward, contacting the front or interior of the car. Rotational acceleration involves the unrestricted movement of the head asynchronously to the neck and body. An example would be a boxer getting punched in the side of the face, causing his or her neck to twist. Injuries affecting the brainstem, and rotational acceleration is thought to be the leading cause of concussions. Brainstem injuries can lead to momentary paralysis, and it can affect bodily functions and memory. Most modern helmets sufficiently protect against linear acceleration, but do not adequately protect against rotational acceleration. The brain can withstand rotational accelerations which last up to 5 milliseconds, but in professional football, contact impacts last from 10 to 15 milliseconds. Because of this, preventative measures on limiting rotational acceleration and or decreasing friction and should focus on decreasing the frictional coefficient. Some current mechanical preventive measures being researched include the impact diverting mechanism, liquid shock absorption, and the outer shell model. The first mechanical preventative measure I researched was the impact diverting mechanism, or the IDM. The IDM is a decal or sticker placed on the exterior of the football helmet, and it works by decreasing the frictional coefficient between the decal on the helmet and the impacting surface. It is composed of 4 layers. The outermost layer decreases rotational acceleration during high-speed collisions. The middle layer decreases friction between the 4 layers, and the innermost layer attaches to the exterior of the helmet. The researchers tested it at a speed of 5.5 meters per second, and dropped it at 3 impact angles, 15, 30, and 45 degrees. They found that the decal reduced rotational acceleration from about 27 to 77% and rotational velocity by 20 to 74%. The results are promising, but one thing to consider is the durability of the IDM, as it has not been sufficiently studied, which requires further studies. This is because the possible cost to replace the IDM can prove to be unfeasible. Overall, the IDM should be considered as a possible preventative measure for the future. The second mechanical preventative measure I researched was the liquid shock absorption model. This fluid-based shock absorber applies a constant force to the head to minimize the risk of a concussion. Essentially, it minimizes the jolt or blow to the head and thereby reduces the amount or degree the brain shakes inside the head and contacts the skull. The researchers in this study used computational models and conducted simulations to evaluate the effectiveness of this concept. The collisions were conducted at a speed of 9.3 meters per second, and average brain tissue strain reduced by 27.6% with a plus or minus error of 9.3%. Further studies need to focus on the actual implementation, and also the study did not expand on if this reduced average brain tissue would prevent traumatic brain injury. Overall, this concept is promising, but more studies are needed to prove its efficacy. The third and final mechanical preventative measure I researched was the outer shell model. This idea stems from the concept that adding an outer shell would decrease linear and rotational acceleration by decreasing the overall forces transmitted to the brain. Sorbothane was used as the outer shell material due to its non-Newtonian properties, such as viscoelasticity, and also included reduced vibration transfer and vibration-related stress. Essentially, this is beneficial as the original impact force from one player would cause the material in the helmet to become more solid and thus act as a harder shell. This property is utilized to reduce the impact on the player. The model was tested using a pneumatic ram test, an air-powered ram that hit the helmet at several locations and angles. The researchers found that the shell reduced linear accelerations 5.8% at one location and 10.8% at another location, and reduced rotational acceleration by 49.8% at one location. These results are very promising, but further research needs to go into the cost of the material and its overall durability, similar to the IDM decal. Overall, the outer shell model should be considered as a possible preventative measure for the future. Out of all of these mechanical preventative measures, the IDM decal seems to have the greatest potential with its ability to decrease the frictional constant, but the outer shell model and the fluid-based shock absorber model also have potential. All 3 solutions seem to decrease the forces affecting brain injury and could be successful additions to the modern helmets. However, all of these models need further testing, such as actual in-game in vivo testing. Cost and durability would also need to be considered. Another possible preventative measure includes involving training and muscle building, as muscles in the neck play a tremendous role in concussion incidents. Strengthening the neck muscles is another method to prevent concussions, as it increases stability and minimizes the jolt to the head experienced during impacts. Researchers created a musculoskeletal model to analyze the role of muscles. Isometric muscle strength, eccentric multiplier, muscle activation patterns, and impact properties were all examined. Eccentric strength refers to the ability of a muscle to lengthen as it contracts. They found that by doubling neck strength and increasing eccentric multiplier from 1.2 to 1.8, head injury criterion, brain injury criterion, and head impact power reduced by 10, 5, and 8% respectively. What this means is basically the head injury and brain injury decreased. However, the most intriguing finding was that while doubling neck strength is beneficial, posture was found to reduce angular velocity up to 30%. This shows that by teaching some proper technique and training can have an impact. But in some situations such as blindside hits, where a player doesn't see the hit coming, the player would not have an opportunity to correct their posture. Essentially, while there are benefits to be made, everything cannot be simply fixed or mitigated just through training and technique regimen. And a final measure I looked at was possible policy changes or rule changes in football, which could decrease concussion and therefore CTE incidents. Football has undergone significant changes over the past 20 years to help reduce injuries to the players. Changes in the concussion protocol have seen vast improvements, including a 5-step procedure for players to return to play. Concussion detection has also greatly improved with the UNC, an unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant who stands on the sidelines looking for any symptoms of a concussion. However, this system only works when players seek help or report their symptoms. So a player can refuse to divulge symptoms if they want to play. The system, however, does the best job it can do. A potential policy change includes altering or removing kickoffs. This is because the head accelerations, rotational and linear, upon impact, have found to be the greatest out of every type in football. This translates to higher potential for head trauma and development of CTE. Furthermore, the play itself has a limited effect on the game, so removing it wouldn't cause like a major game shift. From 2016 to 2020, 60% of kickoffs resulted in touchbacks. What this means, the offense simply starts at the 25-yard line, with the play being negligible by itself. By changing this aspect of the game, by simply making the offense always start at the 25-yard line, would make football safer and reduce CTE incidents. In conclusion, in order to mitigate the effects of CTE in football players, traumatic brain injuries and concussions must be limited. Different helmet models should continue to be tested, especially in a game setting, in order to provide better protection for the players. Neck strengthening and technique training should be further studied to see if they can help make the game safer. Further studies need to examine the benefit of a player's health by altering current rules on kickoffs, including but not limited to starting the offense at the 25-yard line should be explored. Thank you. I think you're muted.
Still muted. Sorry. Thank you so much for that. I did have a question or two come through. So the question from Jordan was, what is the kind of hardest, what's the hardest part of the research that you conducted here? Looks like you're still muted right now. You're good.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to figure out how to fix that. The hardest part of my research was finding as much in vivo testing and statistics involved with it, as it's hard to actually measure stuff like using new materials or new preventative measures in an actual game, as that requires like a lot of procedural stuff and regulations. So I wasn't like, it was really hard to find that. I was able to find some studies like I think Canadian football and some college footballs, which recorded like the actual metrics of like rotational head acceleration and impacts. But it was extremely hard to find something that exactly mimics and simulates game, I guess, game examples. And that's why like I was trying to avoid using stuff which use computational models, but that wasn't exactly completely possible. So I was able to find stuff like pneumatic ram testing and helmet dropping tests, which somewhat like mimic it, but they don't mimic it completely. And that was like the hardest part for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that this is primarily focused on, right, the NFL right now. But in terms of next steps, would you kind of ever go into the realm of youth football, right, and kind of making that more touch or flag oriented for the development of the brain to limit those particular things? Was just curious on where you're going to go with this.
I think that's a great point, because that was something I was looking at. Because personally, like I wasn't allowed to play football for my parents for like these certain reasons. And when I was researching about football, I found it was either over like a 5-year span or a 10-year span or even 1-year span. There were over like 1 million players playing football in high school. And as shown, like the effects can come from like a minimal like experience. from like 1 to 2 years or 1 to 2 seasons. So by mitigating like the effects and focusing on even at a high school level or even at a younger level, it can be important to stop like CTE incidents or concussion incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from seeing things on the internet and news and whatnot, I know that they've taken some steps, not necessarily with football, but for example, right, I think it's up until 16, you're not allowed to head the ball in soccer to kind of minimize this particular, in certain areas of the country, they're limiting that ability, so they're removing some of those things. So would definitely be interested in kind of following what you do with this, because there's a large number of different ways that they can mitigate that without significantly affecting the game, right? Removing an actual common I guess action of like heading the ball in soccer is a little bit more would affect a larger amount of change than say removing the kickoff or teaching the ability to tackle in the correct way in general. But really love the presentation overall, and we'll come back to any additional Q&A at the end after we have Abigail and Khyathi present. So I'll turn it over to Abigail now to have her present, and I'll put you on spotlight. But thanks again, Nikhil. I appreciate it.
Hi, okay, let me pull up my slides.
No problem. And I can see it, so we are good to go.
Okay, hi, I'm Abigail Upton, and welcome to my presentation on implementation and access to mental health resources in high schools. Whoops. I'm so sorry, I don't know why that happened. To start off, there is an unmet mental health need in adolescents. An estimated 20% of youth suffer from a mental health disorder in the United States, and COVID-19 has triggered a 25% increase in anxiety and depression worldwide, as well as the unmet need for mental health care is like estimated around 54%. Okay. So getting into my research project, I had a total of 70 participants, and looking at the race and ethnicity pie chart, the red shows that the majority identified as white, and in the blue of the gender pie chart, the majority also identified as female. The majority also attended Lowell High School in San Francisco, as can be seen in the red. And in the grade pie chart, the green shows that the majority are on the 12th grade. And in the diagnosed with a mental health condition, the blue shows that the majority were not diagnosed with a mental health condition like anxiety or depression. And as can be seen in the yellow portion of the additional support at school, the majority don't receive any additional support like a 504 plan or individualized education program. And the majority also don't receive professional help outside of school. So the data was collected through surveys and interviews. I posted a survey online on Instagram, Facebook, and other social media outlets. And I asked high schoolers and recent graduates to complete it. And the survey included questions on mental health support inside of schools, stress levels and stressors in schools, as well as awareness of resources in schools. And then willing participants from the surveys were interviewed and asked more detailed questions like, is there anything the school can do to help you feel less stressed? Or what is working and not working with the current resources in place? And next, I will share my resource or my data on the resources, but first I want to familiarize you with the resources that I use and I asked the participants about. So I asked the participants in the survey and the interviews about their awareness of wellness centers, counselors, and nurses stations. And these are all just like adults that are there and can support people or participants. And these resources were chosen based off of what most schools provide. So getting into the data, participants reported that they felt the resources provided at their schools were not helpful. And this came from both surveys and interviews, where participants were asked the following question: if you are aware of resources like the ones listed above at your school, how have they been helpful, and did you feel safe and comfortable there? As can be seen in this graph, while about 11 or 12 participants reported that they felt safe and helpful, the other 60, around 60, reported that they didn't feel safe and or comfortable, or they just hadn't used the resources at all. Stress levels also varied widely among participants. This was another question from the survey. And what was concerning is over 70% of the participants chose a number above 5. And 5 was considered like a decent amount of stress, like not too overwhelmed with stress, but a decent amount. So on the plus side, students were mostly aware of resources, with 90% of participants selecting at least one resource that they're aware of, with the majority selecting that they were aware of wellness centers, counselors, and a nurse's office. And students also generally use the resources, with about 41 of the participants having used one of these resources at least once, and only 22 have never used a resource. Moving on to resource usage with those diagnosed with a mental condition. As shown in the blue of this pie chart, while 2 of the participants that were diagnosed with mental health condition like anxiety or depression received help, 4 had never used it. And the red and yellow show that about 12 participants felt that they hadn't received sufficient help from these resources. And there were about 20 participants of the 70 that reported that they were diagnosed with a mental health condition like anxiety or depression. Some themes that were identified through this project is that participants who reported feeling less stressed at school and were not diagnosed with a condition like anxiety or depression were more likely to say that the school provided resources like wellness centers and counselors were more helpful than participants who reported feeling more stressed, those that selected a number over 5, or were diagnosed with a condition like anxiety or depression. Some problems that were identified through this is understaffing and a lack of resources. Of all the interviews that were conducted, it was unanimous that participants felt that the reason they weren't able to receive sufficient help is because there weren't enough staff members that were there to support them, or enough resources that the school could provide them. And they felt that this came from a lack of funding. Some solutions that were identified were supportive staff members. A good number of participants reported that they felt safe or comforted at school because there was a staff member there they felt comfortable with. And another solution was better funding for resources. A few of the interviewees that attended schools with very well-funded resources felt that that was because, or that they were allowed to receive better help because of that. Some limitations of this project were that this is a convenient sample. It can only really be applied to a specific population, and that is because the majority of the participants, the majority of the 70 participants, came from one city, San Francisco, and the majority also came from the same school. For the future, it would be beneficial to collect data from a larger population, as well as to collect data from different perspectives, like from staff members, not only students. And it would also be beneficial to conduct more interviews, as well as regularly survey the student body. This should be an ongoing conversation with the student body on how students can get the help they need and how schools can provide it and improve these resources. Here are my citations, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Abigail. Just a couple of questions here. One, I know you had said there were limitations specifically around certain pieces of the study, but one thing just anecdotally I wanted to ask is, do you feel that these numbers might skew positive or negative correlations with the times of the school year, right? So you're coming into school in the beginning, then you have, say, midterms, and then you might sometime between midterms and finals survey them again, and then finally finals. Do you feel like those numbers might change what you're seeing in any of those scenarios?
I feel like it could have a small change, but I don't feel like it would affect it that much because I did collect this data over the summer and I tried to make it clear for participants to report like how they felt on average. So like look back at a whole on the school year prior about how they felt. So yeah.
No, that's great. I definitely appreciate that. And then one thing you touched on specifically, right, were the differences and limitations and resources and whatnot. So do you surmise that schools that might be more publicly funded and less funded would have larger populations that feel that they wouldn't necessarily receive the help? And I know that we don't have exactly the data, but curious to hear your thoughts on this as you've been pretty knee deep in it for the last couple of months.
Yeah. So something that I noticed is participants that came from public schools were definitely more likely to report that they felt their schools needed better funding and that they were understaffed than participants that came from private schools. There is definitely that difference.
Absolutely. And then the other question that I had was in terms of next steps, right? Where do you want to kind of go with this research? And are you kind of more along the path of, I kind of want to work in the industry to focus on providing additional resources for those underfunded schools, or like increasing the policy? Or would you like to be like embedded in those particular school systems so you can kind of build it from the inside out?
Yeah, well, to answer your first part of the question about future is I would definitely want to collect data from a larger population, maybe from the whole country rather than just one city, to look at broader data and see the differences. And for your second part, I do want to work in education. I've always wanted to like be a teacher or something like that. So this is definitely a career path I see myself in. So hopefully I can make a difference and help students.
Yeah, definitely was more curious, right? Do you want to go the policy route or the teacher route? But that's really cool that you're like, I want to be in the thick of it, being able to provide those resources from the front lines in general. So absolutely wonderful presentation. I really do appreciate it, Abigail, and love with what you're doing, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'll send it over to Khyathi for the final presentation today.
Hi. Sorry, it's just taking a minute to load.
No problem. Let me know if you have any issues or you need me to help with anything. This will be our final presentation, so we'll open it up in a couple minutes after you're done for some final Q&A. But just let me know when you're ready and we can go from there.
All right, yeah. Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. Thank you.
No problem. Absolutely. And again, I just want to thank everybody for attending here. The students that are presenting today have been working tirelessly over their 10 sessions, whether that be 10 weeks, 4 months, 6 months. So the amount of work done here and then in the future is really incredible.
All right.
It looks like you started screen sharing, but I can't see the presentation at this point. I just wanted to make sure that you have the correct tab available to you. No problem.
May I know what you can see?
I just see that you have started screen sharing. I don't see the a link yet.
It's just lagging a bit on a point.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. I'm trying.
Yeah, and the other thing that you can do is if you want to just email me the presentation, I can also screen share as well. I will just chat you directly with my email. It's just anthony@polygens.org. So I just chatted you that. Yeah, I know.
Sorry, would you mind sort of exiting, sort of like stopping the spotlight on me. I think my screen is just frozen. It's not.
Oh, yeah. So you're off of Spotlight. Let me see. Give me a second. Let's see. Okay, is that, let me just, I can stop the sharing for a second to see if that will work. And then if you want to reshare. See if that works here. It looks like your camera, did you turn your camera off? Oh, nope, she left for a second to come back in, hopefully to reload, and then we'll jump into the final presentation. But it's been incredible over the past couple of hours here just to see all of the different types of projects, presentations, elevator pitches, as well as the presentations here specifically with the amount of work. And I feel like it hasn't always been the easiest to go through. There's been times that these students have run into some obstacles, but for those in attendance here, I just want to make sure that they all know that this is a lot of work outside of school. So these students are working on something that is of high interest to you. So I really do appreciate you taking the time and working on this outside of your already regular scheduled programming that I'm sure does take up a lot of time. And as Abigail mentioned, there are levels of help, but there can always be more. I just want to tell everybody one of the pieces that we got from the session before is that the students find that one of the harder things is asking others for help or asking others for assistance, but more often than not, people are willing to go above and beyond for even strangers to help them out with something that they're working on. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that that hardest thing is just to get the question asked. But once you do that, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how willing those individuals will be to come to aid in any different type of situation here. But I'll keep waiting for a couple more minutes while Khyathi figures out the tech issues. Not an issue at this point. This happens from time to time, so want to make sure to give her the time to try to rectify that situation here. But in the meantime, Abigail and Nikhil, I'd love to kind of ask a couple more questions about your particular projects. Would love to hear from either of you or both of you. We can start with Nikhil about what do you think was the most interesting thing that you discovered while working on your project?
The most interesting thing I particularly found was, I guess when I was just looking at the different ways people were looking to solve the problem, I guess. Like I thought the IDM decal was really cool because first of all, when I first saw it, I had to actually like took me time to process what it was because I didn't really understand how like a particular sticker on a helmet could actually, I guess, have an impact that great. So that was the most interesting thing I could find.
That's awesome. No, I love that. I love that. And I see Khyathi, you joined back. Wanted to see if you your bandwidth was working on.
Yeah, sorry, I had to turn off my computer to rejoin. Yeah, I think it should work if I slide share now.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me just try once more.
There we go. Looks like we're good.
Right.
Perfect. You got this.
Okay. Hi, my name is Khyathi, I'm going to today be presenting my paper on type 1 narcolepsy and its pathophysiology and treatments. So type 1 narcolepsy, abbreviated as T1N, is a sleep disorder diagnosed by its namesake symptom of narcolepsy attacks, that is, excessive daytime sleepiness. Contrary to popular belief, EDS has a very wide range of severity. The victim abruptly collapses into deep sleep only in the most severe cases. Its 4 other symptoms are insomnia, sleep paralysis, hallucinations on the edges of sleep, and cataplexy, which is a sudden loss of muscle tone during strong positive emotions. T1N is caused by the death of hypocretin neurons, which normally regulate processes that are associated with REM sleep. Because of this, all the treatments that are currently in circulation require constant medication to compensate for this loss of hypocretin. So the loss of hypocretin, alternatively known as orexin, is ultimately the root cause of T1N. Hypocretin regulates many bodily processes from digestion to cognition, but its most impactful roles are played in the regulation of sleep-wake states. It has 2 subtypes, hypocretin 1 and 2, which differ slightly in structure and areas of influence, as can be seen here. Hypocretin is, in this image, labeled as orexin. It's affected by areas such as the dorsal raphe and the basal forebrain, which are the main producers of serotonin and noradrenaline, respectively, both of which are wake-promoting neurotransmitters like dopamine. Additionally, orexin can also control the wake-promoting neurons, such as, again, in the basal forebrain, and the locus coeruleus, which, the locus coeruleus is what produces noradrenaline, not. So first, the pathophysiology of type 1 narcolepsy. It can be broken down into 2 parts. First, the cause of hypocretin loss, and then the second is the effects that stem from the hypocretin loss. The cause of hypocretin loss is commonly known as the autoimmune theory and can be broken up further into the 3 steps of genetic predisposition, which can then be, and then the symptoms are onset with a trigger, which produces the hypocretin autoantibodies. Firstly, the genetic predisposition. T1N has a very strong correlation with certain genes, but most people with these genes do not develop T1N. 2 prominent genes are the HLA-DQB10602 gene, which is part of the HLA complex, which basically is a gene locus which codes for the antibodies that are used by the immune system. The other gene commonly that can cause T1N is the T cell receptor alpha locus, which codes for the alpha chain of the receptor that can identify antigens on the surface of T cells. Obviously, the presence of these genes is observed in a much wider demographic, and so for this reason, researchers are still not entirely sure on all the factors which may determine what the significant hypocretin neuron death that is observed in T1 in patients. Second is the trigger, which would cause symptom onset. Though T1N is rooted in genetic causes, the age of noticeable symptom onset can commonly be anywhere from 15 to 30 years of age. Because of this, the onset must have a trigger to kickstart the production of autoantibodies. Most commonly, this is a mild Streptococcus A infection, whose likelihood of occurring are influenced by early factors in the womb. But this can also be caused by other environmental toxins and also the notorious pandemic swine flu vaccine, which can increase the likelihood of triggering T1N. Finally, hypocretin autoantibodies. T1N, surprisingly, is considered to be an autoimmune disorder. So its pathogenesis, or the evolving of its the disease's progression, it follows autoimmune mechanisms. For this reason, autoantibodies are created when the immune system mistakes the hypocretins as foreign antigens, which is known as molecular mimicry. This can also occur through other, as of now, not clearly understood deviations in the lymphocytes. Next are the T1N symptoms, all of the mechanisms of action of the disorder that follow the loss of hypocretin neurons. The defining symptom of type 1 narcolepsy is excessive daytime sleepiness. But you may be surprised to know that this has a mechanism of action that is very closely related to insomnia. Excessive daytime sleepiness, it stems from the instability of wake-promoting neuron firing rates. Specifically, these hypocretins must continuously project to stimulate the wake-promoting neurons. However, when hypocretins are no longer able to activate these neurons on a steady basis, the wake-promoting neurons start firing randomly. In T1N, when 90 to 95% of the hypocretins are killed off, the firing rates of WPN become much more random. So in wakefulness, this means the sudden onslaught of the sleep state, and during nighttime, this can translate to bouts of insomnia. Hence why the mechanism of actions for EDS and insomnia are surprisingly so intertwined. The other defining symptom of type 1 and narcolepsy is cataplexy, which which is actually the defining symptom that separates it from its variant T2N. Hypocretins normally regulate REM sleep paralysis. What may be confusing to understand at first is why hypocretins why cataplexy, which can be observed as the patient suddenly falling limp under like strong emotions like laughter, for example, how this is associated with a sleep disorder. The answer is that cataplexy, the mechanism of action from that actually stems from the control of the paralysis that naturally occurs during REM sleep to prevent a patient from acting out their dreams and injuring themselves. Through a sort of very intertwined mechanism, through a very intertwined process, the hypocretin, which would normally prevent the areas of the brain which trigger laughter or intense emotions, characteristic of very strong REM dreams. Hypocretin would prevent these signals from activating the paralysis of spinal motor neurons during the day. During REM sleep, this control is lifted, and as such, the person would be safe at night. Obviously, when 90 to 95% of hypocretins are killed off, this is unable to happen. Excuse me. Secondly, I would like to discuss the treatments of type 1 narcolepsy, which can be broken up into 4 distinct classes. Firstly are stimulants like modafinil and amphetamines. These primarily block the reabsorption of wake-promoting neurons like serotonin and norepinephrine, as well as dopamine, in particular, they block the reabsorption of these neurons by axon terminals, which would normally reuse these WPN after they activate the ends of the other neuron, the receptors. Modafinil is a first-line drug. It's used for the milder symptoms and has much lower side effects. The second-line drugs, however, are amphetamines and sympathomimetics, which have more disturbing symptoms like shakiness and irregular heart rhythms, but can effectively manage the more severe cases of type 1 narcolepsy. The second class of drugs are gamma hydroxybutirates, which are commonly known as GHBs. These are also second-line drugs and essentially bind to the GABA B receptors. The GABA B and GABA A receptors and their neurotransmitters are wide-acting and control are very multi-purpose. They are the primary inhibitory neurotransmitters, which can affect the most regions of the brain. Hence, why blocking their intake can have much severe consequences beyond just preventing the symptoms of type 1 narcolepsy. Antidepressants are also used to promote wakefulness when patients are suffering from type 1 narcolepsy. These can be broken up into primarily those which affect serotonin to a greater extent or norepinephrine to a greater extent. The SSRIs only inhibit the reuptake of serotonin and have far less side effects compared to TCAs. TCAs have been around for a much longer time and have primarily been used beyond treating depression to treat other disorders which are inadequately managed by their existing treatments, which were originally passed through the FDA personally. Because of this reason, the TCAs being much more potent are also far more dangerous. Finally, the last treatment that I would like to discuss is pitolisant, which is a selective sort of inverse agonist and antagonist of the histamine 3 receptor. Previously, all of the reuptake inhibitors that I have discussed have been of dopamine, serotonin, or norepinephrine, also known as noradrenagen. However, pitolisant, which is derived from triptolisant, has been proven to be a far more effective treatment than the priorly discussed drugs. For example, in this graph I have included to the left, the precursor of pitolisant is shown to promote noradrenergic activity far more than modafinil, as well as the cortical concentration to a still significant extent. Sorry. And so finally, after discussing the various classes of drugs that are used to treat type 1 narcolepsy, I'd like to briefly discuss the future directions of treatment. Because T1N is an autoimmune disorder, the new lines of treatment that have currently been explored include gene therapy, and stem cell transplants, which are meant to directly intervene in the loss of orcs and neurons, so that the patient does not have to depend primarily on continuous medication, which may have serious side effects as they build up over time, particularly for severe cases of T1N. Obviously, these treatments are still in clinical or preclinical trials and are not as of yet released into the market. These are my references. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Khyathi. I know we're a little bit close to time, but I did want to pass it over to Usman for their presentation here so we can close out our last and final presenter. Usman, you okay to present now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can I get my presentation loaded up? I had to switch computers because my other computer wasn't loading the Zoom call.
Absolutely. No, I'll just touch on Khyathi's presentation here. So I'd love to hear what you plan on doing in the future for next steps after this, as we do wait for Usman and his presentation to load.
Yes, so one of the things that I was thinking about as continuation would be perhaps to model the mechanism of possible action that one of these future treatments might take. Again, I didn't elaborate much on the future directions, but it is very possible that a combination of these treatments might be used, primarily gene therapy and stem cell transplants. So gene therapy would be primarily used to sorry, just all right. One possible way that we could combine these treatments for sort of maximum efficacy is if we were able to change the genes to better to get rid of these particular T cell, the polymorphisms in the T cells, alpha locus, and also if you were able to identify a person who has a predisposition early on prior to the age of onset, then it is very possible that you could entirely prevent T1N. The other way is with stem cell therapy, which is at this point still very unreliable, especially for non-lethal conditions like T1N. So if we were able to somehow make this more streamlined and also less invasive, then I believe that stem cell therapy would also be sort of useful for it, because it is ultimately sort of an autoimmune disease where the cells are killed off.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And I really appreciate that. The next steps there, there's a lot of opportunity. I just wanted to check in on Usman, see if your presentation is loaded to kind of pass it over to you.
Yeah, it's all good.
All right, great. So you can jump on camera. I'll spotlight you and then you can share your background.
My background, okay. Looks
Yeah, you're good. All good.
So can everyone see it?
Yep, we're good to go.
Okay, so my research project was on phage therapy, and essentially most of it was towards the public's perception. So I was trying to assess the public's perception of phage therapy. So before we begin, phage therapy isn't really like known as very common, I guess, nowadays, because it was it's a generally emerging topic now. So bacteriophage. So bacteriophages are viruses that are selective predators of bacteria. Years of human research has consistently shown that they are non-harmful to humans, and they were discovered in the late 1920s and early 1930s. As research progressed, mainly in Russia and France, in order to advance it, in order to treat bacterial infections. And note, this is like before antibiotics were found, before penicillin was found. So this was the big thing back then. And it was treating stuff like dysentery, cholera, wound infections. Though, yeah, like I said before, it was before when, even with its fall though, because of antibiotics, since they were just more efficient, they were easier to produce. It's more of like a pharmaceutical thing where pharmacies tended to choose this thing that was cheaper for people and I guess more convenient. Even with that, still, they proved to be vital in combating multi-drug resistant bacteria, which limited clinical treatments exist. So instead of, it's kind of in the name, where regular antibiotics can't treat these bacterial infections, and there aren't really many treatments per se available right now. So being these selective predators of bacteria, many people jump to this nowadays to try and find a cure for, or a sustainable cure for this. Also, a phage also has other diverse functions, because it's very minute and small size, allow it to cross the blood-brain barrier, proving it vital to help with neurodegenerative diseases. So in a sense, this is more of like a theoretical thing, but it could become reality, in which you give a phage like some sort of drug, and it can administer the drug by crossing through the brain and helping with those proteins that are misfolding, causing the diseases. And yeah, and then I guess in this bottom right corner is just general stuff on how phages, like this is the most, I guess, common type of phage many people would think of upon seeing it. So this leads into, well, my actual research, which is the problem. So even though it is cost effective, phage therapy, like I said before, is cost effective. It can be more effective than some of the leading treatments now, and it has very diverse functions. But there is an issue, because it may be hard for people to try and take it, especially with its connotations that are aligned with it being a virus. And with the recent pandemic, many people would jump to the idea that all viruses are bad, or the idea, or just in the pandemic in general, how miscommunication was being spread, and many people weren't willing to take the vaccine because of false claims being spread. So, and not to mention that bacteriophages have an unfortunate link to communist origin, since they were developed early on in the 1920s in the Soviet Union, which can further hurt its viability. So this led me to try and create my research, which was to create a survey in order to understand the public's perception of phage therapy, in order to, by assessing their baseline reactions to it, and to clarify any misconceptions they have, in order to ensure that this treatment, this treatment is as I guess the information spread isn't as false and is more like scientific towards people. And this survey uses also uses different ways of explaining information to try and convey the best way possible to explain phage therapy. So for the general methods of my survey, I just use convenient sampling of people I had easy access to. It was conducted from what is this, August 10th to August 23rd. There were 8 main questions on this survey relating to the history of phage therapy, its uses in medicine, and other attitudes and issues on comfortability about it. Most of the questions, for the most part, there were some, what's it called, short answer questions for any like outlying concerns, but for most of the part, it was a scale ranging from strongly agree to agree, strongly disagree to agree, specific multiple choice answers, and yeah, like I said, a short answer section on any reoccurring concerns. So I guess before I get into the results, mainly the participants, the age group was mostly, I'd say, equal around all of them, though there was a bit of a majority on older adults towards the 30s and 40s. Education was generally above a high school level, and due to my convenience sampling in the area I live in, most participants' race was white or Asian. So now going into the results and discussion. So in this first question, they were given, I guess, a summary, or I guess a brief description of phage therapy, and they would answer a certain question. And then later on the survey, they'd get another type of description, and then they'd get the same exact question. And I tried to see how the answers would vary between the two questions and how the description was. So the question was, would you be willing to take phage therapy as a treatment against superbug infections? And superbug infections are, like I was talking about before, multi-drug resistant bacteria. They both mean the same thing. And from this, before giving like more information on it, there was a generally high population of people trying to get it. There was 49% of people that were in support of it. So after giving more information that was relating to safety and its effects rather than more scientific answers, this comfortability increased all the way to 63%, as 50% of people ended up, 50%, there was a 50% decrease in people choosing I wouldn't. And this, just me looking at this data and analyzing it, I kind of found how the way a scientist or medical professional explains this treatment can not drastically, but it can really affect how many people can take it. And focusing more on the ideas of safety and its effects should be a more primary concern for them over more scientific ideas on how it infects and how it spreads. And they should be making explanations that should be more understandable to the average person rather than people who are literate in scientific literature. So then the next question was relating to comfort about research being conducted in Russia in its early history. And just even though there was a considerable amount of neutral people and comfortable people, I analyzed this data and kind of saw how there was a considerable group of people that were not willing to take it just on external matters alone. And it's this type of connotation is kind of hard to get rid of, but it's just something I wanted to analyze to see what would happen. And I guess in the later slides, there is a way to combat it. And I guess this question also relates to this. I also asked the question, does your experience with the COVID pandemic affect your comfortability with bacteriophage therapy? And a considerable group, again, of 33% were affected. Not with the wording of this question, it's hard to tell if it was negative or positive, but they were affected by the pandemic and it did change their ideas. So even with going back to that idea of the connotations, trying to get rid of these like labels that are put on bacteriophage, these unfortunate labels that are put on them is going to be hard, but scientists need to start in order to combat this. Scientists need to try and establish some sort of credibility in order to transcend its connotations. And I feel like this next piece of data that I'm about to show kind of has a sort of solution towards this. as when I was talking about people's ideas towards bacteriophage therapy helping out with neurodegenerative diseases, there was an overwhelmingly positive support for it, as there was 61% of people saying I would, and 19% of people saying I strongly would. And there was neutral, but in reality, I kind of more focused on the support for it. And I guess seeing this, it should be noted that researchers should focus more on expanding on its diversity to help people understand that this truly is a powerful treatment. And even with its past labels and its previous history, that shouldn't be the judge of how effective it is. And towards the end, I was talking about just improving comfort with phage therapy, just general means. So I asked on the data to the left, is there a delivery method for bacteriophage for the bacteriophage treatment you would be unwilling to take in fighting a multi-drug resistant bacterial infection? And most people were willing to choose through a pill, aerosolized, and injection, which just knowing this information, I guess, could just help with more technical aspects of delivering this treatment, as people won't be as scared as just getting the treatment done. And for the graph on the right, I was talking about what is the most comfortable, where would people find most comfort in finding newer information. So mainly the two biggest answers were through medical journal articles and through local doctors. And this just, with this massive support, I kind of saw how people, I guess respondents, put these researchers at such a high pedestal. And knowing this, researchers need to take responsibility, knowing that their voice really does affect how people view this treatment, and making these explanations as understandable as possible could like turn one person from taking it versus not taking it. So, and then there's some limitations with my experiment. The survey was a convenient sample, so I can't really relate this to the entire public, nor more or less like the world or like America. But instead of viewing that as, I guess, assessing, it's more of trying to understand, this survey was trying to more understand the patterns and themes that emerged between responses. The survey's question and response phrasing may have influenced some of the responses. Going back to the last pieces of data, the one with people having this unwillingness to take certain ways of injecting the treatment, I didn't put there were some people in the short answer section saying that they were completely willing to take all of them, and that it was a bummer that they had to choose one. And I guess people aerosolized, looking back at the experiment, aerosolized is a word I don't think most people know what it is. It means like a spray, like a nasal spray or some other type of spray, that a medical type of spray that they'll use to put the treatment into you. And that may have just scared people because they didn't know what it was. Yeah, that goes into technical jargon. And then limited response options goes back to what I said about how some people couldn't choose that they were willing to take all of them. And yeah, now I'm done. There's questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we wrap up, I'll ask a question here. We're a little bit over time, but wanted to kind of figure out what the most interesting thing that you found throughout your research was.
Definitely the overwhelming support for like neurodegenerative diseases, because generally when I saw the data, there was both an opposition and support, but when it came to something like a neurodegenerative disease, and I feel like people tend to like the idea that they kind of found, at least in my opinion, I felt like many participants saw this as kind of a new hope of trying to cure the disease. So this onset of people supporting it kind of shocked me, and I kind of want to see phage therapy go in that direction a lot too, to expand on its functions.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great to hear. I think that's definitely some thread that is amazing about the research, but wanted to thank all of our presenters today for our STEM talk number 19. I think the presentations were incredible, amazing, inspiring. So I wanted to thank all of our presenters for their time. I know it's not easy getting up and presenting in front of everybody. So feel free to reach out to me, reach out to your mentors with any other questions or concerns, but I really do wanted to thank every single one of you. And we'll wrap up here. I hope everyone has an incredible rest of their weekend. Join a couple of the other sessions if you'd like, but thanks again. Take care all.